So lastly, we come to emotion, right? So the first thing that we need to understand is that it's also called valence in the academic sense, right? So this originates from Latin, be strong, be well. Yeah. So we like to use this word a lot here. So here we see the name of Charles Darwin, right? So he argued that emotion expression is part of our human evolution, right? And then there's a lot of advantages of emotions. Very easy to understand, right? So we need to have them to activate behavior, managing approach and withdrawal behavior, fight and flight responses. And of course, it's a good way of communicating non-verbally, right? And then 3 classical theories of emotions, right? Okay, I'll talk about the first 2, right? James-Lange theory, Canon-Bard theory. Canon-Bard theory came after James-Lange theory. Right? James-Lange theory, I think, is now pretty much obsolete, right? But some of the psychotherapies still make use of it, right? So it puts the focus on physical state, right? Physical sensation, right? So we need to feel something before we know that we actually feel something, right? Yeah. So this is putting the emphasis on the physical state, right? The physical state really provides the initial cues, right? For the emotion that happens later. Catharsis, I'm sure everybody knows. I mean, yeah, purging one's emotion through physical actions, right? Yeah, so it's part of the therapy, right? Part of the behavioral therapy, yeah. And then Canon-Bard theory is that, okay, so instead of such things happening in sequence, physical state and the emotional state, okay, why not, we propose that both states occur simultaneously, right? So that's what he's trying to propose, okay? Not a good theory, okay? And then the last theory, the third theory is the best, right? So it's Schachter-Singer, right? A 2-factor theory. Okay, so it's talking about general arousal, right? So general arousal is not some very specific physical sensation. It's just some kind of arousal, okay? Some kind of unconscious, physical sensation, right? It's not really specific to any particular body parts. And then we make this, cognitive appraisal, yeah? Okay, evaluation, yeah, of context. Yeah, then it's from this cognitive appraisal, then we get this subjective feeling, okay? Yeah, so it's this kind of 3-component network, right? Of course, the 2 factors, general arousal is number 1, and then cognitive appraisal is factor number 2. Yeah. So cranial nerves, so we have cranial nerves V, trigeminal, and facial. Cranial nerve number 7. So I wouldn't elaborate on this. Okay, this is really for everybody's general knowledge. So the upper third receives both ipsilateral, contralateral inputs, and the lower third receives contralateral inputs. Yeah. So unsurprisingly, we have voluntary and spontaneous, okay, control of expressions. So this is this is the figure showing you, okay, this voluntary expression looks very forced. Yeah, involuntary, this one looks more genuine. Yeah. Okay, expression, recognition of emotion. So, up to now, we kind of agree that there's this universality of emotional expressions, right, across different human cultures. And then surprisingly, okay, the developmental timeline is similar for blind and sighted individuals, right? So even if you're blind from birth, you can have emotion just like everybody else. Yeah, very interesting finding, right? So now we talk about environmental contributions and individual differences. Again, this is really for general knowledge, right? So presence of others, okay, we know this, right? This is called the observer or the experimental effect, right? Can influence intensity of emotional responses. And then there's cultural differences, right? Attention to faces. Individual differences, genes, right? And then later on in the last lecture, we're going to talk about schizophrenia, for sure, right? Psychological disorder. A little bit about autism as well, right? Okay, The Look of Premeditated Aggression by Arnold Schwarzenegger, starring Terminator 2, right? Yeah. I think it's released in 1999. Great movie. All right, if you haven't watched it, please go and watch it. One of the best movies of all time. Yeah. Okay, so can we spot a liar? This part onwards, I just want to talk a little bit about polygraph. Okay, so the graph itself. Okay, so polygraph is not EEG. Yeah. Okay, I want everybody to be clear. It can involve EEG, but EEG is not an intrinsic component of it. Right. What is intrinsic to polygraph is that you look at the respiration, you look at GSR, you look at blood pressure. So it's very kind of focused on your sympathetic responses. Okay, so the inaccuracy here is that we need to focus on the found guilty section, right? Yeah, so the found guilty people are the people who are ultimately found to be guilty. And the polygraph, signal that almost like 40% of them are innocent. So it just shows that its accuracy rate is just not good, right? If it's accurate, it should be 0, right? Fully accurate should be 0, but it's not, okay? And then can we spot a lie using fMRI? Yes. Okay, this is typical evidence, right? So telling the truth, involves the inferior parietal lobules, and then telling lies. So you recruit more executive functioning, right? So medial frontal gyrus involves the central executive more, right? Because you have to confabulate things. So not surprising. This kind of finding is not surprising at all. Okay, so biological correlates of emotion. I just want everybody from here to pay close attention to the brain regions involved. Okay, so A and S is involved. Okay, unsurprisingly, okay, we had that in the quiz 1. So amygdala, insula, right? The first two brain regions, and the next two is the ACC, right? So ACC here is very, very interesting, right? So it's, as I said earlier, right? It's involving attentional processes, and here this is involving the appraisal of threat, attending to threat. Yeah, and then if you have high anxiety, you will tend to attend to threat pretty much unconsciously, right? It's a subconscious process. And then we have this basal ganglia. A lot of regions are right, basal ganglia. Right, it's not just the amygdala, right? We also have the putamen, right? Our caudate nucleus, all that stuff. Okay, so this part is a bit controversial. It's more like social psychology, okay? Cerebral cortex. And then, frontal lobe damage can produce emotional disturbance. Right, so if your left hemisphere is kind of damaged, right, you would have difficulty socializing with your friends, for sure. Yeah. And then right hemisphere is damaged, you will not be so spontaneous in avoiding threats. Right, not good thing to have. But however, I do find the third point quite peculiar, okay, quite controversial. It says that our right hemisphere plays greater role in expression and perception of emotion. So when you look at this thing, the left part of the face, right? Yeah, you'll be focusing more on the left part of the face, and then that person actually looks happier. But my take is that, when I look at that, usually we make our eye movements from the left to the right, correct? Right? Most of us are right-handers, okay? We process things from left to right. So if you do that, then of course, right? The figure on top looks happier, right? But if you pay attention, okay, let's just, just forget about what I said, okay? Make your eye movements from the right to the left. You'll find that the picture, right, the face on the bottom looks happier, right? So attentional processes also play a part. That's what I want to say, yeah. And then facial expressions are not symmetrical, right? Yeah, so basically this person's face is not symmetrical, right? If you cut it into half, okay, and then make the same replica of it, okay, you can see that, this person just looks different. I mean, he's smiling much more, right? When the kind of the right part of his face is actually, I'm not so sure whether it's the right or the left, okay, but one part of his face, I think it's the left part of his face, okay? It's kind of duplicated and then merged together. So left face twice, right? He seems much happier. Yeah, very interesting figure, okay? And then biological correlates of emotion. I want everybody to pay attention to this slide, okay? Important, right? So tutorial MCQs, we have a question on this, okay? Try it out, okay? And then, so basically we have no happy or sad centers, right? So it's a bit like the engram concept, right? So we don't really have a specific region dedicated to the processing of a specific emotion. No. Okay, and such brain regions, they might overlap, right? They can participate in more than one emotional state, right? Okay, so last few slides, okay, we talk about emotion regulation, right? So emotion regulation is related to the concept of appraisal and reappraisal, right? So conscious and unconscious strategies we utilize in such evaluations, right? So avoidance, directing focus away, that's kind of ignoring stimulus, distraction, suppression, all these things, right? They can be both, either, I would say either conscious or unconscious, or they can be both, right? All right, and now the second slide on emotion regulation. So just now I talk about cognitive reappraisal. Here it is again. right? So two key regions, right? Prefrontal cortex and cingulate cortex. So these are the two cortical regions, right? That's kind of exerting some kind of top-down control over all these so-called emotional brain regions, right? And then there's also this development, emotion regulation from gerontology. So it says that older adults are more likely to ignore negative emotion, and aging will lead to decline in your prefrontal areas. Not too surprising. And DMN network, depending on what you do, right, it can remain intact during such biological aging. Yeah. And then the last slide is also important. I want everybody to pay attention. Right? So these are the brain regions that we use to understand other people, social cognition, right? Superior temporal cortex, TPJ. I also have TPJ in my previous work. Okay, it's also found, but not in social cognition. All right. And then amygdala. Right. So amygdala is always there. Right. Negative emotions. Right. Is always processing. Right. So with that, I conclude today's lecture. All right. So thanks everybody for coming. Right.